Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you.
Okay. So we will continue from where we left yesterday, and just to briefly take you back to what was discussed yesterday. Yesterday we were discussing about this question that Hart has posed as to what is there a necessary connection between law and morality? And before he entered into this question, he was trying to first draw a distinction between these two concepts of justice and morality. And yesterday we had spent a considerable amount of time we spent on discussing what is it that Hart understands by justice itself. So today what we will do is that we will take our discussion further and come to the second leg of this chapter 8 that we are discussing, wherein Hart tries to draw a distinction between moral obligation and legal obligation. Now, all the discussion that we are doing today and that we had done tomorrow would serve as an entry point into the next chapter, something which Vijita will be discussing after this, as to how law and morality are interconnected. Now, yesterday we discussed that what Hart says is that justice and morality are not interchangeable terms. Rather, the manner in which Hart understands justice and morality is that justice is a species and morality is a genus. That meaning thereby that justice is merely one segment of morality, and there are different aspects of morality which cannot be covered with this idea of justice. Now, in what we will be discussing today, what we will be discussing is then how do we understand the term morality. So yesterday we spent our time understanding what justice means. Today we will spend our time understanding what is the meaning of morality. Now, before Hart ventures into this discussion, what he says as sort of a disclaimer that he gives in the beginning is that there are generally two difficulties that we face when we are characterizing or when we are trying to elaborate on this idea of morality. That is, most of the time morality is used very casually with other terms, with different other terms. For example, in the previous segment we were talking about how morality is casually used and interchangeably used with justice, and Hart tried to clarify that distinction. Similarly, he says that morality is very interchangeably used with ethics. So what he says is that the term morality itself it's quite open in nature and is ambiguous and vague. And the second problem that we generally, philosophical problem challenge that we face when we are characterizing or trying to define what morality is, that the question is often posed whether moral principles or obligations are universal in nature, or does the expression of moral principle and obligation change with time, society, and individual? So are moral principles immutable in nature, or are they mutable in nature? So that is another problem that generally is faced when trying to at least define in Hart's own words this concept of morality. So what he does is, in order to evade these two problems of vagueness and openness, and the problem of whether moral principles are universal in nature or are they mutable and do they change with changing attitudes, time, place, society, etc., he tries to identify moral principle on the basis of 4 criteria that he has developed. And this segment, and today at least with respect to chapter 8, we will be discussing just these 4 segments. Now, these 4 segments of 4 features that he has identified are importance, immunity from deliberate change, voluntary character of moral offences, and form of moral pressure. So these are the 4 heads on the basis of which Hart goes ahead and argues that in order to distinguish moral principles or moral obligations from other forms of obligation, whether legal obligations or other form of non-legal obligations which are not specifically moral obligation, we need to understand these 4 points. That is, importance, immunity from deliberate change, voluntary character of moral offences, and form of moral pressure. Now, if you remember what you had studied in Jurisprudence 1, Hart had defined primary rules in the form of obligations, right? So what Hart said was that there are obligation imposing rules, and those obligation imposing rule consists of both moral rules and legal rules, and as well as social rules. But all obligation imposing rules are not primary rules for the purpose of law. Only those obligation imposing rules will be primary rules for the purpose of law, which are recognized by legal system as primary rules. And that is how the secondary rules had come into picture, specifically rule of recognition, where the only role of rule of recognition was to ascertain amongst these different kinds of obligation imposing rule, which of these obligation imposing rule is actually a legal rule. Okay, that was the only rule of recognition. So from Hart's previous discussion, which we have already done in the first semester, what we find is that Hart concedes that there can be different kinds of obligation imposing rules, and when he says law is a union of primary and secondary rules, what he means by primary rules is in fact an obligation imposing rule. But an obligation imposing rule that qualifies as a primary rule in Hart's legal theory is still separate from other kinds of obligation imposing rules like moral rules and social rules. Now, the second important thing that we need to again quickly recap is that if you remember, Hart talked about social pressure and how social pressure was important in determining whether a specific rule is an obligation imposing rule. The more the social pressure, the more chances that a rule is an obligation imposing rule. Now, so he is again invoking these two concepts here as well, and what he says is that as we move from primitive society to legally advanced society, okay, because both primary rules in this union of primary and secondary rules, which Hart calls law, and moral rules are obligation imposing rules. In primitive society, it may be very difficult to distinguish between moral rules and legal rules, because there is always a considerable overlap between moral rules and legal rules. For example, you must not kill. It's something which you will find as a part of religious rule also, as a part of general morality of the society, even if it is not coming from specific religion, and also a part of legal rules, for example, under section 299 or 300 of IPC. So what you find is that there is obviously a considerable overlap between moral obligations and legal obligations, and there can be same kinds of obligations which find a place in both moral and legal obligations. So what Hart is saying that in legally advanced society, it becomes much easier to distinguish between moral obligations and legal obligations, to demarcate the territory of moral and legal obligation. So what Hart says is that in the primitive society, it is very difficult to distinguish between legal and moral rules. But in advanced society, and society where law is advanced, where we have not only the presence of primary obligation imposing rules, but also secondary rules in the form of rule of recognition, rule of change, and rule of adjudication, something that we briefly also discussed yesterday, and also which you have gone through in detail in Jurisprudence 1. The presence of these three rules enable us to demarcate between moral rules and legal rules. So one important difference, according to Hart in his own theorizing of law, between moral obligations and legal obligations is that moral obligations do not necessarily come with secondary rules of recognition, change, and adjudication. But whenever we are talking about legal obligation, they will always have accompanying secondary rules, that is, rules of recognition, rule of change, and rule of adjudication. And that is how in advanced legal society you differentiate. That is one preliminary way of differentiating between legal obligations and moral obligations. But however, that does not mean that all types of non-legal obligations, and when I say non-legal obligation, it can include all those legal obligations, all those obligations which do not have the characteristic feature of this primary and secondary rules, but nevertheless are not also necessarily moral rules. They can also be social rules, and this is something that we will discuss in a few minutes as to how he distinguishes between moral rules and, let's say, social rules. Most of these non-legal rules, how do we determine which of these non-legal rules are important and which of these are less important? Now, according to Hart, the importance of non-legal rules, and we are not talking about legal rules here because the discussion right now is centered upon moral obligations. Now, according to Hart, all these non-legal rules, the importance that we assign to these non-legal rules depends on the amount of sacrifice of private interest which is required in the observation of these non-legal rules, and the amount of social pressure that operates in order to ensure compliance with this non-legal rule. So there are two important things: that the amount of sacrifice of private interest which is required in order to observe these non-legal rules, and the amount of social pressure that is exercised in order to ensure compliance with these non-legal rules. So more the sacrifice of private interest required in order to comply with non-legal rules, the more important the rule is. The more the social pressure asserts itself in order to ensure compliance with those non-legal rules, the more important a non-legal rule is. Okay, so this is something that Hart talks about and says that how non-legal rules, how importance plays an important role in determining what kind of a non-legal rule something is, whether it's a moral obligation or merely a social rule, which does not become a moral obligation. Now, having said so, he also says that despite that, there is always some kind of common feature between moral rule and a legal rule, and that common feature being that both moral rule, the only point of commonality that Hart is talking about between moral rule and legal rule is that both of them are binding irrespective of whether you give consent to that rule or not. So, for example, even if you do not accept a moral rule, they sort of become binding on you, and society expects compliance with a moral rule. So even if you don't believe in this moral rule that killing is wrong, and you believe that killing of another individual must be allowed, irrespective of whether you believe in that moral rule or not, or whether your consent was taken before legitimizing that moral rule or not, you are expected to conform to it. And the same happens in law, irrespective of whether you give your consent to law or not, and more so whether you are aware of the law or not. So in your initial days into law, you must have studied this concept of ignorantia juris non excusat, meaning ignorance of law is no excuse. So irrespective of the fact, not even whether you have given your consent or not, even if you are ignorant of the law, you are supposed to be bound by that law, right? So what Hart says is one of the commonalities between moral obligations and legal obligations is that both expect conformity irrespective of whether an individual has given consent to those obligations or not. And the second is, in both kinds of obligation, there is some social pressure which operates in order to ensure conformity. And if you comply with those moral rules, or if you comply with those legal rules, it is not that you have achieved something. Rather, it is the minimum level of expectation which is made out of you. So you are expected to comply with moral rules. So if you stop at a red light in a traffic signal, you would not be applauded for it. Okay, because it is expected that you will stop at a red light in a traffic signal. Similarly, if you refrain from killing individuals, you are not applauded for being an extremely moral and virtuous individual for not killing other individuals. Rather, you are expected not to kill other individuals per se. from this perspective of morality. So what Hart said is there are two commonalities between moral rules and legal rules. One being that irrespective of whether you consented to those obligations or rules or not, you are expected to comply with it. And second, your compliance is not considered to be an achievement and you will not be applauded for this compliance, but rather your compliance is considered to be something that must be done. Now, when Hart is talking about, so let's come to those 4 points now, wherein Hart is discussing what is it that defines morality according to Hart. And the first part is importance. Now, I've already said that according to Hart, the relative importance of different types of non-legal rules, and these non-legal rules will include moral rules and other forms of rules as well. Now, when I'm saying other forms of rules as well, for example, according to Hart, rules of dressing, rules of fashion, rules of common etiquette as to whether you should eat with a knife or a fork, etc. These are not moral rules. These are definitely not legal rules, but they are also not moral rules. There are other forms of non-legal rules also that are prevalent in society. But not all non-legal rules will become moral rules or moral obligations. Now, I am using the term rule and obligation interchangeably because Hart considers rules to be obligations, and that is why I am using this interchangeably. And even in Hart's own discourse, you will find interchangeable use of rules and obligation. So, not all forms of non-legal obligations are necessarily moral obligation. In order to qualify as moral obligation, it needs to have 4 important characteristics according to Hart. The first being importance. Now, as Hart himself said, that importance is reflected by the amount of sacrifice of private interest that is demanded to ensure compliance with a moral obligation, and the amount of social pressure that is exerted to ensure compliance with a moral obligation. So, for example, if you do not use the proper knife or fork while eating in a specific restaurant, it is a social rule, but you would not be reprimanded, and the amount of social pressure demanding conformity would not be as much as, let's say, if you kill an individual, okay, which is again not only a legal rule but also a moral obligation. So if you kill another individual, moral obligation would demand, would abhor that specific act more as compared to you not using a specific kind of knife or you not dressing in a specific manner on a specific occasion. So that is what Hart says, that there are 2 requirements as to how we determine the importance of a non-legal obligation or a rule, as to how much private interest needs to be sacrificed and what is the amount of social pressure being asserted in order to assure compliance with that specific non-legal rule. Now, and this is where he brings a distinction between moral obligations and legal obligations. That it is not important that all legal rules or obligations are important, because we find several laws which are still valid laws till they are repealed, and there are unimportant laws. For example, we still have something called Telegraph Wires Possession Act. I'm not sure about the correct title of the act, but we still have something called wherein Telegraph Wire Unlawful Possession Act 1950, which sort of regulates possession of telegraph wires and considers possession of telegraph wires beyond a certain dimension to be illegal. Now, we do not no longer use telegraphs, but that law is still the law of the land. And what Hart says is that even though that specific law is illegal, is unimportant law, it is still considered to be the law of the land till you repeal that law. But that is not the case with moral obligation. Moral obligation is something that is considered to be important because it demands sacrifice of private interest, and social pressure asserts itself in a manner to ensure compliance with that moral obligation. Now, so this is when Hart says first aspect as to how you distinguish between moral obligations and legal obligations on the basis of importance. And importance is defined in a specific manner by Hart. The second is when he is discussing the second aspect is immunity from deliberate change. Now, what Hart says is that, and this is something that was the reason why Hart introduced secondary rules in his theorizing of law. Because one of the reasons, for example, for introducing rule of change, if you remember, was that primary rules in itself, because they're obligation imposing rules, they can be static in nature. It is very difficult to bring about a change in primary rules. And that is why there is a need of accompanying secondary rule called rule of change, so that changes can be brought into primary rules easily. Now, the same thing is being said by Hart when he is defining moral obligation. And what he says is that when we talk about moral obligations, it is difficult to deliberately change moral obligation. Now, this will take you back to how Hart defines obligation in the first place. Hart defines obligation by referring to social pressure. So, a rule will become an obligation. Anything becomes an obligation, according to Hart, if a requisite amount of social pressure is exercised in order to ensure compliance with that obligation. Now, how does therefore moral obligation undergo a change? It undergoes a change with a change in social pressure. Okay, so for example, let's say 10-15 years back, homosexual, non-heterosexual partnerships was something that was completely looked down upon by the moral standards of the society. Not that it is completely accepted today, but we see a gradual change happening, wherein there are still pockets, or at least there are pockets of society today wherein which will recognize and accept non-heterosexual partnerships. Now, that means that there has been a change or shift in social pressure which accepts moving beyond the heteronormativity. Now, that brings about a change in social pressure. Now, according to Hart, moral rules therefore can only be changed by changing the social pressure or the amount of social pressure exercised. But that is not the case with legal rules or legal obligations. Legal obligations can be subjected to quick changes. There can be a repeal of law, there can be an enactment of legislation, there can be an amendment of legislation, which fall in the bracket of rules of change in secondary rules, and legal rules can be changed. So the second aspect the second characteristic feature that Hart invokes to distinguish between moral obligation and legal obligation is immunity from deliberate change. So moral rules and non-legal rules, for that matter, have some immunity from deliberate change. Okay, though that does not mean that they cannot be changed. They can only be changed. Okay, Kirti, I hope I'm audible now. Just let me know if I'm not audible. So moral rules and legal rules, non-legal rules or moral obligations or rules, it's not that they cannot change, but the change is slow in nature. The change only comes with change in social pressure. But that is not necessarily the case with legal rules or obligations, because legal rules or obligations can be changed by invoking, in Hart's sense, rules of change, like processes of amendment, repeal, enactment of a new legislation, etc., etc. But Hart does concede that sometimes a change in legal rule can also bring about a change in moral rule or moral obligation. And one example that we can think of is abolition of sati. So it was the enactment of the abolition of sati law that gradually brought about a discontinuance of the practice of sati, and it was not that. So we find that moral rules or social rules can follow a change in legal rules. So Hart concedes that, but despite that, what he's saying is that moral rules or legal rules are not subject to deliberate change. There is an immunity from deliberate change, but legal rules can be subject to deliberate change, but that is not the case with moral rules or obligations. Now, the third characteristic feature of moral obligations that he's talking about is voluntary character of moral offense. So what he says in this specific portion is that moral obligations, and when we are talking about moral obligation, if something has been done unintentionally, you are not blamed for it. So moral blame does not follow unintentional acts. So let's say that a person was, despite taking all the possible precautions, was unable to conform with a specific form of a moral obligation, the person would not be guilty of moral blame. So let's say, for example, A attacks B, okay, and B in self-defense attacks A and kills A, okay. Now, if we have to look at it from the perspective of moral obligation, it need not be a morally blameworthy act, because B was acting only in self-defense. Now, in law, whether it is a legally wrongful act or not will depend upon whether the proportion of self-defense exercised was proportionate to the attack itself. So, if the self-defense was in excess of the attack, it would consider to be still a wrongful act. So, if you look at section 299 or 300 of IPC, you will find self-defense and proportionate self-defense to be an exception under section 300. And so, if let's say A slaps B, or A assaults B, and B in response kills A, B will be guilty of culpable homicide not amounting to murder under section 299, would be still guilty, would still have committed a legally wrongful act. But let's say we have to look at it from a moral perspective. B would not be as morally blameworthy because perhaps even if it was the retaliation was not proportionate, B was retaliating in response to an attack made on B. So that is how Hart distinguishes between moral obligations and legal obligations, saying that unintentional acts or acts done by taking due precautions, etc., may not be morally blameworthy in cases of moral obligation, but that is not completely true in case of legal systems. And that's why there is something called strict liability in law. But strict liability is something which is itself an oxymoron if we talk about moral obligation. You cannot be liable for something for which you did not have any intention to act in a specific manner. The next form of the last characteristic feature that Hart invokes to define or distinguish moral obligations from legal obligation is forms of moral pressure. Now, what he says is that when we are talking about moral rules or moral obligations, the typical forms of moral pressure that is exerted is an appeal to respect the rules itself, and not threats of fear or not threats of punishment or some kind of penalty or abrogation of some kind of interest. But in legal rule, most of the time, there is some kind of penalty attached to non-compliance with the rule. So those are the threats that operate in order to ensure compliance with legal rule. But when we talk about moral obligation, it is generally in the form of appealing to respect those rules itself. And the only kind of repercussion that we can think of in cases of non-compliance with moral obligation is that the person may feel a sense of guilt or shame. But apart from that, there is no other threat exerted, threat and fear or abrogation of any kind of interest which is exerted in case moral obligation is not complied with. So these are the four different manners in which Hart has tried to distinguish between moral obligations and legal obligations. So I will stop here and you can now comment on what you understood in this chapter. And also, if you have any queries or questions, you can ask.
Ma'am, regarding the point that you just taught us regarding the forms of moral pressure, so you said that while enforcing moral obligations, unlike legal obligations, there is no threat involved. And there is just appeal for the person to follow the rules. But when we talk about the notion of social boycott, So does that not fall under the idea of moral obligation?
Yes, it may. Yes, that's right. The heart is. You need to understand that heart is trying to also not just draw a distinction between moral obligation and legal obligation, but also moral obligation and social obligations. Okay, so all forms of social rule automatically do not become moral rules. Only those rules which have these four characteristic features will fall in the criteria of moral rules or moral obligation. Now, before I answer your question, there is something that Hart talks about when he is trying to differentiate at least between legal obligations and moral obligations. And that is that in moral obligation, the reason why you need to comply with moral obligation is because there is something internal about moral obligation. And when he says internal, he means to say that it has to be followed with good and proper intention. Okay? Though Hart does say that this internal aspect of moral obligation is not completely true, but it does play a role somewhere, a minute role in determining whether an obligation can be considered to be a moral obligation or not. Now, what he says is that when we are talking about moral or non-compliance with moral obligation or seeking compliance with moral obligation, the typical types of pressure or pressure that we see in moral obligation is that you need to respect the rules itself. And you need to respect the rules because the rules have to be respected. That does not mean that moral obligations are not sometimes coupled with some kinds of threats. Some kinds of threats, like, let's say, if we say that social boycott, that is the prevailing morality. If you do not comply with social rules of a specific society, that does not necessarily mean that it is not accompanied with certain kinds of threats or certain kinds of repercussions. But the primary focus of moral obligation, that is, according to Hart, is to respect the rule itself. That the rule should be respected because the rule is so important. The rule in itself is based on is motivated by some good intention or proper intention or motive. That does not, according to Hart, mean that it may not be accompanied with other kinds of threats or appeals to fears. For example, many of the moral rules, at least the religious rules that we talk about, are accompanied with threats of, if you do not do this, you will go to hell. If you do not do this, you are going to... in Hinduism, there are categorizations of hells. So if you act in a specific manner, you are going to suffer much severe penalty in the other world. So it's not that it does not come with some moral rules, moral obligations do not come with certain kinds of threats or an abrogation of your interest. What however Hart wants to say is that moral rules, it is not a characteristic feature of moral rules, okay? But almost all the laws that we have, in case the law is not properly followed or a legal obligation is not followed, it will come in form of some kind of penalty. That penalty may be severe in nature or may be very minute in nature. That is not the question, but it will come with some kind of penalty or it will come with some kind of consequence. And that is not necessary according to Hart in case of a moral obligation. That is what he's saying. I don't know. I hope that was clear. If not, then I will maybe try to explain it.
Yes, ma'am, it was quite clear. Thank you.
Okay. Any other question or comment?
Ma'am, regarding the two difficulties which we have discussed, so the first difficulty is regarding the interchangeable use of morality and ethics, but I'm not clear with the second difficulty which Hart discussed.
Okay, in the beginning, right? So what he was saying is that the two philosophical problems that we generally face when we take this task of defining morality is that first, the term morality itself is very vague. And this is something that we discussed yesterday also, and this Hart was discussing in the first segment of chapter 8, that we have this tendency to conflate morality with several other terminologies which appear to be close to the term morality. And in the first segment, something which we discussed yesterday, we were trying to distinguish between the concept of morality and justice precisely for this reason, that let's not confuse justice with morality. Justice is just a segment of morality. It is not what morality is about. There are different other aspects of morality which cannot be answered by using the term justice. Okay. So the first philosophical problem that Hart says is that the problem with undertaking any task to first define or understand what morality is that it is vague in nature. The texture is open. And the term he uses is open textured. It's vague. Anything and everything is, we try to fit into it in order to, and we try to call everything morality. But everything according to Hart is not morality and in order to overcome this vagueness or this challenge, what Hart does is therefore come up with 4 characteristic features which he finds prevalent in a wider definition of morality. So even if you take a wider definition of morality, you will find these 4 features to be prevalent. And he says that this is a much easier way because it allows us to overcome this philosophical challenge and also gives us a much clearer insight into what moral obligation is. And those 4 features being something that we discussed: importance, immunity from deliberate change, voluntary character of moral offense, and form of moral punishment.
Ma'am?
Yes, Atul.
Ma'am, when he talks about moral obligation and legal obligation, is he talking about an ideal society where there is only one opinion and everyone is following that, and if anyone opposes it, then it is not the case, then everyone is following one opinion and there is no dissent in that society? Is he talking about an ideal situation?
Your question again.
Ma'am, is he talking about an ideal situation where there is only legal obligation and moral obligation of मैम वो ये आइडियल सोसाइटी की बात कर रहा है क्या? मैं ये पूछ रहा हूँ.
हार्ट आइडियल सोसाइटी की बात नहीं कर रहा है. हार्ट ये कोशिश कर रहा है कि वो बेसिकली कोशिश कर रहा है कि मॉरल ऑब्लिगेशन और लीगल ऑब्लिगेशन में डिफरेंस बता पाए. So the entire exercise that we are going through, or rather Hart is going through, and something that we are discussing is that what is the difference between moral obligation and legal obligation? He is not bothered right now with the creation of an ideal society. He is giving his own concept that as to how law should be understood, right? This entire chapter is a part of a book called Concept of Law. So that all the discussions that we are having will eventually lead us into theorizing what law is. And for that, it is important that we first understand and distinguish law from other concepts that we generally confuse law with. So what Hart is trying to do at this specific stage is he is trying to lay down the groundwork for subsequent discussion, something that we will be discussing and Ruchita will be discussing subsequently. That how is it that you define legal obligation and moral obligation? Now, the reason why he is paying so much emphasis on defining moral obligation is because to answer the question that we discussed yesterday. So, if you remember, yesterday we discussed how Hart thinks that there are 3 recurrent questions about law, and the second question being, how does legal obligation differ from, and how is it related to moral obligation? Okay, that is the question. Right now, the task before us is not to conceive of what an ideal society should look like, and that is not, I think, that is not a journey that Hart is taking. Rather, what Hart is trying to do is trying to answer this recurrent question that comes before legal theorists, that are law and morality interconnected? Does law have some moral value, or are law and morality 2 separate concepts in itself? And that is where Hart is leading us to. And for that, what he is doing in this segment that we discussed today, he is trying to define moral obligations and trying to distinguish as far as possible moral obligations from legal obligations. And this will lead to subsequent discussion as to whether legal obligations and moral obligations are one and the same thing. Is there a connection between them, or are they completely separate?
Okay, thank you,
I
ma'am.
answered your question.
Yes, ma'am.
हेलो
I
मैम,
understood your question properly. Yes, Rakesh.
मैम मेरे 3 क्वेश्चंस हैं,
हाँ,
जिसमें मेरा पहला क्वेश्चन ये है कि क्या मोरालिटी और इथिक्स सिनोनिम्स हैं या दोनों में अंतर है, और दूसरा
let me answer one by one, I think. Otherwise, I will get confused myself. Okay. According to Hart, morality and ethics are two different things. Okay. Morality should not be confused with ethics. So I will just take you to the specific page if I can find where he says so. And that's where he says that morality, yes, it is page 168 of the 168, which says that the word morality and all other associated or nearly synonymous term like ethics have their own considerable area of vagueness or open texture. So Hart does not go into the question of trying to clarify per se whether there is just morality and ethics are one and the same thing. But what he definitely does is, and at least something that what I understood by the text is that he does not want to conflate morality with ethics. Because what he's trying to say is that many times we use it with ethics, but I will try to use the only term that I'm using is morality. So I don't think, according to Hart, morality and ethics are one and the same thing. Okay. Yes, Rakesh.
मैम जैसा कि
Ma'am,
आपने
sorry
बताया
to
कि
interrupt. Yeah, ma'am, sorry to interrupt. Can you please also explain the few lines in the same paragraph, the second difficulty?
Okay. The second difficulty. Okay, Shabaz, can I come to your question after I answer Rakesh's? Yes, Rakesh, please.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
Rakesh, please proceed
Ma'am.
with the second question.
मैम जैसा कि आपने बताया कि मोरालिटी और इथिक्स दोनों में अंतर है, तो मेरा अगला क्वेश्चन ये था कि अगर दोनों में अंतर है, यानी दोनों अलग अलग है, तो
हार्ट
जो
के हिसाब से दोनों में अंतर है।
हाँ,
हार्ट
ठीक,
ऐसा
ठीक।
हाँ
ठीक है मैम, तो प्राइमरी रूल जो पूर्व की स्थिति है को मोरालिटी से और जो सेकेंडरी रूल है जो विधिक स्थिति है एक तरीके से, उसको क्या इथिक्स का मतलब यहाँ जो लॉ से मैं ले रहा हूँ, जो कोड ऑफ कंडक्ट से एक तरीके से मैं ले रहा हूँ, क्या कहा जा सकता है इसको?
जब हार्ट डिफाइन करता है प्राइमरी और सेकेंडरी रूल्स, तो उसके हिसाब से प्राइमरी और सेकेंडरी रूल्स दोनों लॉ के ही पार्ट हैं। तो जब विधि को वो डिफाइन करता है, तो वो ये कहता है कि प्राइमरी और सेकेंडरी रूल्स दोनों के कॉम्बिनेशन से ही लॉ बनता है। तो वो क्या कहता है, लॉ इज अ यूनियन ऑफ प्राइमरी एंड सेकेंडरी रूल्स। ओके, अब प्रॉब्लम ये कि प्राइमरी रूल्स क्या है।
मैम फ्यूजन से वो बोलता है, और फ्यूजन और यूनियन क्या दोनों अलग अलग होते हैं या एक होता है?
He says union. He uses the term union. Law is a union of primary rules and secondary rules. Now, what does union of primary rules or secondary rules means? We have already discussed in the first semester that there are several obligation imposing rules. Okay? जितने भी रूल्स होते हैं वो ऑब्लिगेशन इम्पोजिंग रूल्स होते हैं। बहुत सारे ऑब्लिगेशन इम्पोजिंग रूल्स होते हैं। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, स्टैंडिंग अप व्हेन लेट्स से टीचर वॉक्स इन द क्लास, मोस्ट ऑफ यू डू दैट व्हेन वी आर इन फिजिकल क्लासरूम्स, you tend to stand up. It's sort of because it is, you consider yourself obliged to stand up, right? Now there are similarly for example, wearing black to a funeral, wearing a specific color on a specific event, etc., or going to mosque on Fridays, going to church on Sunday, observing fasts on specific days. All these are rules which are obligation imposing rules. So we follow these rules because we feel that we are obliged to follow these rules. And what is it that creates the obligation? It is the social pressure. And this is something that Hart said in the beginning of his concept of law, and which was a part of the jurisprudence one syllabus. So that's why all of you, maybe if you get time, just revise that portion on Hart, and it will help you clarify things further. So what he says is that social an important ingredient in order to ascertain whether something is an obligation or not. Now, there are several obligation imposing rules. So let's say in this class of 20 people, all of you are obligation imposing rules. But all of you, despite being obligation imposing rules, would not qualify as law or something that law considers to be primary rule. Okay? In order for you to qualify as primary rules in law as a union of primary and secondary rules, what you will require is a rule of recognition. Okay, that is a secondary rule. Now, the only task of rule of recognition is to, let's say, choose between these 20 of all 20 of you obligation imposing rules, which of you will qualify to become a primary rule in this law is a union of primary and secondary rule. So that is the task of rule of recognition. So primary rules in Hart's theory of law are obligation imposing rules. But all obligation imposing rules are not primary rules in Hart's theory of law. There can be obligation imposing rules which are non-legal rules, and those non-legal rules can be moral rules, social rules, etc., etc. So that's how you can divide this entire spectrum of obligation imposing rules into two halves: legal rules and non-legal rules. And in this half of non-legal rules also, you can divide it further into moral rules and non-moral rules, okay, which do not qualify as moral obligations. Now, what qualifies as moral obligations? Let's say out of 20 of you, 10 of you qualify as primary rules, and when I use rule of recognition, 10 of you will qualify as primary rules. Rule of recognition can be very simple, like, for example, rules of recognition can be considered in Indian circumstances to be enactment of a law by the parliament, by passing of a law by both houses of parliament, precedents aside, notification, gazette. All these are the requirements that a law needs to go through in order to qualify as a primary rule. Okay, so let's say out of 20 of you, there are 10 who have been qualified as primary rules by rule of recognition. That still leaves 10 of you. That does not mean that you are not obligation imposing rules. You all are obligation imposing rules, but all of you again would not be moral obligations. Only if you satisfy the 4 criteria mentioned by Hart, that is the 4 criteria being immunity from deliberate change, importance, voluntary characteristic of moral offences, and forms of moral pressure, would you qualify as moral rules. So that is why you need to be very clear with what is legal obligation according to Hart and what is moral obligation according to Hart. So in order to qualify as moral obligation, these 4 characteristic features must be present. Only then you will qualify as moral obligation. I hope that answered your question, Rakesh.
Yeah, ma'am.
Ma'am.
Just wait for a second. I think Shahbaz had asked a question and then I will come to your question. That's fine. Okay, Shahbaz. So the 2 difficulties that Hart is talking about when he undertakes this task of elaborating of what moral obligation is. One is obviously the vagueness, and the second that you wanted me to explain is now this is something that we discussed yesterday also, that natural law philosophers, at least Thomas Aquinas and those who follow the tradition of Thomas Aquinas, say that there are certain moral principles and rules which are universal in nature and which are deducible by human reason. Okay, that is one aspect of one manner in which the law morality connection is determined. And apart from that, there are also not as extreme as those who do not take this extreme position and argue rather that morality per se is not universal in nature, it is not immutable in nature, rather it keeps on changing with changing attitudes, time, society, etc. So these are the 2 difficulties that Hart talks about. One is the problem of vagueness that we discussed, and the other is the problem that morality itself may not be whether it is universal or not universal. So in order to overcome, so it's not that Hart addresses these concerns right now. He's rather saying that I would like to overcome these challenges by giving you 4 pointers, and those 4 pointers are these 4 points. and I will try to define morality in terms of these 4 pointers rather than answering these 2 difficult questions. Yeah. Yes, there was another question.
Yeah, ma'am. So I just want to.
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to ask. I'm not so sure if it will make sense or not, but is Hart trying to widen the scope of the morality, or?
Yes. Yes. He is. Actually, he says that in this chapter that I am not taking a narrower version of morality. Rather, I am taking a broader version of morality because many people, many individuals or thinkers who would like to define morality would try to bring in additional criteria apart from these 4 criteria in order to define what morality is. But I am not going into that. I would rather take a broader viewpoint of morality because according to Hart, that would more serve his purpose of subsequently addressing the question as to whether there is any necessary connection between legal obligation and moral obligation.
Okay, ma'am, if that's the case, I just wanted to ask you that for the future, just like the changes of the laws that we see, for example, like the homosexuality and stuff. So even in the future, can we expect that there will be more changes because of the wider scope?
Can you just clarify or repeat your question once more?
Yeah, so we can see the changes of homosexuality and all, right? So with the morality thing. So can we expect more if the society, and also we talk about the pressure that the society can bring, the change, the morality change, right? So does that mean that in the future, or maybe our coming future, whatever, so those things we can see more of changes, morality changes?
Okay, so if we use the manner, if we from Hart's perspective, moral obligations can only be changed. So a moral obligation can only cease to remain a moral obligation, or something which was not a moral obligation can become a moral obligation by change in social pressure. So it is the change in social pressure which will determine whether the status of a moral obligation. So from that perspective, it is quite possible that with the decrease in social pressure, there may come a time that something that is considered to be moral in today's point of time is not even a consideration in future, and something which is not even a consideration today suddenly becomes the morality of future society. That can be, because that will all depend on this idea, according to Hart, on this idea of social pressure. That is how he defines the evolution of moral obligation.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Any other question or comment?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Himanshu this side. I don't have question, ma'am. I want just some clarification from the text we read yesterday. On page number 159, there is on second para, there is a text, the general principle latent in these diverse applications of the idea of justice is that individuals are entitled in respect of each other to a certain relative position of equality or inequality. So, ma'am, what does it mean?
Okay. Now, when we were discussing the concept of justice tomorrow, if you remember, he sort of Hart defined justice in 2 manners. One is distribution, right? That there must be distribution of benefits and burdens. That is the first thing that he talked about. And the second thing that he talked about was that whenever an injury is done, some kind of compensation or redress can be claimed. Now, this paragraph or the line that you're talking about is in pursuance to this definition that Hart talks about. So what he says is that when we are distributing benefits and burdens, the presumption is that all individuals are in a position of equality. Okay, so let's take the example that Hart himself took. That is, let's say an individual has 5 children and all of them committed the same wrong. Let's say all of them stole 1 apple. Okay. but that individual punishes child A more than that individual punishes child B. Now, what is happening? There is an inequitable distribution of the burden between A and B, and that, according to Hart, is a violation of the idea of justice. Because for Hart, justice means equitable. Justice means that burdens and benefits must be distributed among individuals, and they must be distributed in respect to each other in a manner that there is a relative position of equality between them. So the entire idea of justice that Hart builds is that balance of proportion has to be maintained. Whenever you are trying to distribute benefits or burdens, you must do it in a proportionate manner and in a balanced manner. And that is what he means by his idea of justice, that when it comes to individuals in respect to each other, they must be in a relative position of equality, or they have to, when you are applying the idea of justice, they are entitled to, the idea of justice has to be applied by taking into consideration whether the individuals are in a position of equality or are they in a position of inequality. And this is what led to our using of the term like should be treated like and differently should be treated. We should treat different cases should be treated differently. So why like cases should be treated alike? Because you cannot treat two individuals who are differently placed in the same manner, and that is, for example, the entire philosophy behind the idea of reservation. Why do we allow affirmative action? The reason why we allow affirmative action is because all individuals do not have similar access to resources and social opportunities, and that's why you need to provide certain advantages, certain privileges to those who do not have access to social resources and opportunities, so that they can be brought at a level, they can be brought to the level of those individuals who do have access to social opportunities and resources. And that is what at Hart's idea of justice is. That you have to, and the reason why he is using this paragraph is to basically further build up on his subsequent argument that the idea of justice basically can be summarized by saying that treat like cases alike and treat different cases differently. You have to treat individuals, you have to take into consideration whether individuals are equally placed and unequally placed, and then you have to derive your own idea of justice. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions?